Hey everyone, Pastor James here, and I wanted to help you along in your small group by giving you a summary of what we talked about on Sunday. We are in the middle of a sermon series called Relationship Restart, where we're talking about all kinds of different relationships going on in our life. And this last message was about fighting forward. It's about how we resolve conflict. It's about how we interact with each other. It's about how we fight and argue. The bad news that we started with, and there's going to be a question after this, was simply this. Some of us never want to fight. Some of us always want to fight. And few of us know how to fight fair or constructively. And so the question for you, as we think about that reality, is where are you? Are you on more of the peacekeeping side, or do you like a good argument every once in a while? Feel free to pause the video now and answer that question. Awesome. Thanks so much for having that conversation. The first point we came up with was with our know or with our head, which is how we preach, head, heart, hand, something to know, feel, and do. The first thing that we talked about knowing was that the way we fight is more important than how we fight. The way we fight is more important than how we fight. We had 3 myths that we were trying to combat in this message, and the first myth was this: fighting, arguing, and anger are a sign of an unhealthy relationship. That's a myth. Really, what we should know is that the way we fight is more important than how we fight. We talked about these things called the 4 horsemen. Hopefully you also have a sheet with you that talks about those, because we're going to be having some questions about that. But also it'll be on your small group guide as well. The 4 horsemen are simply this. The first one is criticism, where we verbally attack each other, the personality or character of one another. The second one is contempt. This is where we have a sense of superiority over one another. We think we're better than, smarter than, better looking than. Number 3, defensiveness. Really what we said here was that defensiveness in all its guises just escalates the conflict, which is why it is so deadly. It says that the problem isn't me, it's you. Yeah. Last one that usually comes at the end of all those is stonewalling, where someone shuts down, they get quiet, they get non-responsive, or they just agreed to all of their partner's demands about being right. The question for us really is, what are your initial thoughts about the horseman? Is there one that was used on you that you dislike the most? And maybe the hardest question of them all, is there one that maybe you use the most? Feel free to pause now and discuss. Great. What does God wants to feel with our hearts? And it's simply this: the goal of conflict is greater connection and greater community. Over and over again, we're reminded about that in our Ephesians verse that we looked at. The myth that we're trying to combat is this: defending truth and being right is more important than people or feelings. Here's our verse, a small part of it. Only say what is helpful when it is needed for building up the community so that it benefits those who hear what you say. We've been using this guy a lot, John Gottman, lots of others out there. This isn't the one and only, it's the one that I know. Keys to conflict. First key: afraid, sad, mad are important emotions. We've often been taught to ignore those, to minimize those, to push those down. But learning to acknowledge, express, and listen to these harder emotions is vital. Key number 2: no one is always and perfectly right. And approaching conflict with that humility is going to be super helpful. Number 3, acceptance before advice, or connection before correction. People are going to be much more likely to hear you when they know that it's coming from a place of wanting to connect, wanting to be in community together. Number 4, focus on fondness. The person is priority. Issues may not get solved, but we can still work towards cultivating connection and fondness for one another as we resolve the issues over long term. Here's the question that comes out of that point: were any of these modeled well by friends or family? If so, which ones and by who? We'd like to hear about your story, your people, in your life. Any modeled not so well? Yeah? Third part of that question: which do you think is your strength and which one is your weakness? Feel free to pause now and discuss. Awesome. Lastly, what does God want us to do with this information about fighting forward? Ultimately, what God wants us to do is use our words to make a world of difference and an eternal significance. The myth that we're combating here, myth number 3, is this: sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Not true. What does Jesus say? Matthew chapter 12. I tell you that people will have to answer on Judgment Day for every useless word they speak. By your words, you will be either judged innocent or condemned as guilty. Here's the question that comes up with this. Multiple times in our verse in Ephesians 4, it encourages us to be mindful of how we use our words and to use them for building up of one another. What are some practices, exercises, tools we can use to be more aware of how we use our words and to be more intentional about using them constructively? Feel free to pause now and discuss. Excellent. Spiritual practice of the week, which we've already talked about this a little bit, but I would love for you, taking this information, to identify which horseman do you use the most? Where do you camp out at? Where are you on here? Which one comes the most natural to you? And there's on this side of it, there's a list of antidotes. And so, which one is your horseman and which one would be your antidote? And that's the question. Do you feel like you have a good enough understanding of which one you are? And I know this is the harder part, so not everyone has to share if they don't want. But lastly, what are some practical ways that you can start implementing that antidote into your conflict? Conflict is inevitable. Approaching it intentionally and purposefully with good tools is going to be key to good relationships, which is ultimately key to an incredible life. With that question, I am out. Feel free to pause now. Blessings and peace.